This is Building Lifestyles, a show designed to help everyday Australians create a lifestyle that inspires them using property development strategies. On the show, you'll hear from everyday people changing their lives doing property development. You'll learn from their successes as well as some of the challenges they've faced along the way. We also talk to experts from a range of fields who share specialised techniques that you can use to accelerate your property journey. I'm your host, Amanda McEwen, and I'm the founder of the Rising Star Developer. And I'm really passionate about helping everyday Australians build lifestyle using property development. Welcome back to Building Lifestyles. Do we have an episode that will open your mind to a new way of funding deals? Today, we welcome Jason Bibby, founder of the SMSF Financial, a company which helps people create wealth leveraging self-managed super funds. Jason has been passionate about investing since he was 12, learning the fundamentals of buying low and selling high growing up on his family farm. With years of experience in the wealth management industry, he's witnessed both growth and downturns, refining strategies that deliver long-term results. Jason founded SMSF Financial to secure and protect clients' wealth, offering advice grounded in personal experience. As a qualified financial planner, SMSF expert, and accredited derivatives advisor, he's guided over 2,000 clients in wealth creation, with building relationships as the foundation of his business. So let's make the most of our short time together and welcome Jason. So Jason, you started investing in just 12 years old in your family farm, which is absolutely remarkable. What opened your mind to, at that age, even thinking about investing?
Yeah, look, and for this, all credit goes to my parents. So what would happen is that come our birthdays, instead of giving us money, instead of giving us, $20 or $50, what my parents did is they took us to, this is my brother and I, they took us to the real stock market. When I say real stock market, I mean, sheep and cattle, and we'd buy a calf, right? And it'd be about $50. It was maybe, I'd have to check with my mum, but I think the maths went, it was about $30 for a calf and probably about $20 for the milk products that we'd have to have. And then we'd rear the calf and then we'd sell it about 18 months later and we'd sell it for around, $300 or $400. So it was my first 10-bagger returns. That's how we started and that's how we sort of built up. And if you will, it was probably my very first lesson in investing of buying an asset, adding value. Now we added value by putting it out to pasture and fattening it up and then selling high. So buy low, add value, sell high.
Oh, that's amazing. I think we underestimate the impact our parents have in those foundations of money. I do this similar thing with my girls. They get a gift of some material item depending on what they want. We've got teenage girls, so you can imagine what that is. But we also buy them just a small bunch of shares for their birthday and also Christmas, so they can actually watch the growth of that. So rather than just getting something material that they'll forget about in a year's time, hoping that that's instilling in them, watching the value and understanding the value of compounding and growth as well. So I hope that my girls, when they get to our age, will look back and go, okay, yeah, I actually did learn something from that gift, even though I didn't appreciate it at the time.
Yeah, 100%.
Clearly, wealth creation has been in your blood from a young age. Can you just share with us your journey? So you obviously started with cows and sheep.
Yes.
But what worked well, and obviously that evolved into what you're doing now, but what's worked well and what mistakes did you make along the way that you can share with us?
Yeah, for sure. I'll share a couple of examples of how I ended up in finance. So when I grew up in northwestern part of Victoria, in the 80s, it was tough going. We went through droughts, we went through dust storms. I think it was 1984 where the Mallee dust blew nearly 400 kilometres and made a blackout in Melbourne. And then we had locust plagues, we had mice plagues. It was pretty tough going. So wealth creation was a very strong desire. And it was sort of one of the driving questions of my life has always been, gee, there's got to be a better way. And I watched how hard my dad worked on the farm and I'd ask that question of God, is there a better way of doing things? And so we had these calves and we built up this massive money. And then in around 1991, there was a big fad went right through the Mallee and Wimmera and the other areas around, and it was ostriches. Okay. And this is probably my second lesson in investing. And so everyone was jumping on board and there was abattoirs being created and every part of the bird was being used, from the talons to the feathers to the skin to the oil to the meat. and this thing was going bigger than Ben-Hur. The eggs were astronomically priced. Mating pairs were, I think, at one point over $20,000 for a mating pair. We had 6 birds. We had an incubator, and we put our cash in, and Dad obviously put the majority, and my brother put money in. And that's when we learned I learned my second lesson in investing, and it's all about supply and demand and boom and bust. Because what ended up happening is there was way too much supply and there really wasn't the demand that all the hype was talking about. So pretty much the bubble burst, and that was a tough lesson at that point. I was in year 11. And then 12 months later, I spent a couple of years working on the silos, the entire summer holidays, and I'd built up about $5,000. And I went to Dad. I said, righto, Dad, ostriches didn't work. What are we going to do now? And I've got $5,000. What do I do with it? And he's like, well, I think we better go to Garrison's. And I've gone, what's a Garrison's? And he's gone, no, Garrison's is a financial planner over in Swan Hill. We're going to go meet him. And I went over there. Now, I'm a relatively bright person, or I think I am. And I sit down at this financial planner's, and he sits me down. I get about $5,000, and he hands me a book of investments, managed funds. And I start, and I'm flicking through, and he's talking to me and asking about what I want, and I'm half listening, but I'm looking. And it starts off, it's about 4%. Now, this is in 91, 92, right? So interest rates were higher than they are now. And I started flicking through 4%, 5%, 6%, and I saw a trend. So I very quickly went to the very back page and looked at the last 3, and there were 14, 15, 16. And then I've gone, right, I want that one. And then that's when I learned my third lesson, which is past performance doesn't always equal future performance. And I jumped in, I put my $5,000 in, and he actually said, are you sure? And I said, well, it's 16%, right? Now, I'm pretty good at maths. I can work that out. And he's gone, and he said, well, that's what it's done in the past. And I've gone, well, it's written in a book. I want that one. And so then, 18 months later, I think I pulled out my money, and it was about $4,850. I'd lost $150, and I was expecting to have around $800 more, actually more, over $1,000. So that's when I went back to Dad, and I said, righto, Dad, this isn't working. What else? What else are we going to do with this money? And then it was at that point that he introduced me to a stockbroker, his stockbroker, and that pretty much started my journey of being really interested in stocks and investments and investment strategies. And I would say over the next 10 to 15 year period, if there was a seminar or an education that was available, whether it was in property or development or shares or options, then I was basically there and a sponge to increase my knowledge and ultimately to increase my portfolio.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And the reason why we're having these conversations, right? So with property, in property development, once you get your home paid off and you start creating wealth, you need to find something to do with that. Yes, you can do more deals, but it's really important to open your mind to different ways and be able to create wealth with the money that you have. So those lessons that you've passed on are so important. And I love the middle one around the supply and demand, because that's very relevant to property, right? So one thing I teach my students is when we're out there looking for deals, we want to be making sure that we're creating product that isn't an oversupply, but it's also in demand. So really keeping an eye on those supply demand elements when we're creating product as well, because whether it's in shares or managed funds or property, supply and demand are 2 very, very important criteria to get your head around when you're jumping in. So I think it's great that you've mentioned that in the investing side of things as well. So you're the founder of SMSF Financial. What made you want to specialise in this particular area?
I think like most of us, I just sort of fell into it, really. Well, I always had a very strong interest in investing and the stock market and shares, and leading up to the GFC, so 2024, 25, 26, I was extremely leveraged into the stock market, very high margin loan accounts, and the markets were moving in the right direction. Now, I thought I was an absolute genius, and that was another lesson. right? The reality is, monkey probably could have thrown a dart at a dartboard and they would have done well, right? But I'm spending 2-3 hours a night analyzing stocks, analyzing the market, and I thought I was an absolute genius. And we were getting some absolutely ridiculous returns. Like, I mean, annual returns of up 87% over those few years. So we built a very large portfolio in a very short amount of time. I was managing a leisure center. I had about 70 staff. And I remember at one point I said to my wife, "Hey, Kimmy, how do you think we've gone in the market in this last 12 months?" And she's gone, "I don't know, up." I said, "We've made more in the market than we have with you and I working combined." And it was at that point that Kimmy has gone, "Well, why don't you do it full time?" And I never really thought of it. And that was a bit of a catalyst, bit of a switch. And when your intentions sort of go out there and you take the blinkers off and you see opportunities, it was probably within 6 months that I actually got offered a role completely external to what I was doing in the fitness industry. And I got offered a role to work for a national-based company, but I was working in Victoria as a stockbroker. And then I very quickly went from being a stockbroker to being the state manager. But during that time, the GFC hit. And it was like an induction by fire. It was brutal. And actually, the first drop was okay. As in, it was brutal, it was rough, it was hard. We had margin loans and we were getting margin calls and it was a tough time, right? But it was actually even harder because in 2008, I looked at it and I've gone, okay, we're taking a hit. All right, how did I get here? Leveraged, margin loans. All right, let's do everything that I did that worked before. And it did work, and we were building back up, and we were building rapidly. And then we had a bit of a dead cat bounce, which means that the market dropped, bounced, and then dropped even lower. And that was into 2009. It was March 2009, and that was brutal. It was a brutal experience for me to go through that. A lot of the basis of my company now and how I operate and how we use capital protection, or we put a layer of capital protection so we know our worst case scenario, is a result of me going through that experience in 2009 and not wanting to be in that position again. And then the other part is that when we went through that, a lot of the clients had their portfolios, but they were liquidating the portfolios to prop up their other non-liquid assets, such as holiday homes and whatnot, because in that period, 2009, everything was dropping. So, building up from that or rebuilding, I spent all this time building up this portfolio, and then half of it would sort of dropped. The only place where a lot of clients had funds to invest was superannuation. And so I sort of fell into, it's like, okay, well, this is where clients are wanting to use their funds. I need to start, skilling myself up. And it's been, nearly over 15 years of really specializing in the superannuation space. And it's just sort of grown as I've become more knowledgeable, more experienced in it. We've attracted more clients wanting to operate in that space. And then it was really around 6 years ago where I've gone, this is where I want to spend the bulk of my time, and this is where I want to specialize.
Okay, amazing. It's an incredible journey. And I do remember those years. I had a nice little margin loan back then as well. So it was a nice little shake up for, I think, anybody who's investing in the stock market at that point in time.
And everybody had margin loans, right? Like
it was
free money and everything was going up, and lending criteria was very loose back then. You'd almost have, the US, they called them ninja loans, like no income, no job, no assets, here's a loan.
Yeah, it's crazy. Crazy times. All right, so let's just understand more about the SMSF side of things, because the word superannuation can cause a lot of people's eyes to glaze over, mainly because of the perceived complexity, right? So can you just share with us a really simple way to understand what SMSF, self-managed super funds, are, and why someone would actually even want to set one up?
Yeah, 100%. It's a really good point. I find a lot of my clients that come to me to help them out, their biggest hurdle when I ask them, how long you've been thinking about this, and quite often it's been a long time, like 4 or 5 years they've been thinking about it. And it's taken them a long time to take action because of the very first 2 words, self-managed. I get a lot of clients going, Jace, I barely have enough time at the end of the week or the end of the month to look after myself and the household, let alone having to manage my lifetime savings. And so a lot of clients, those 2 words, I think a better description would be self-directed. You don't have to manage it on your own. Like, that's our job. We help manage the nuts and bolts of the accounting, the taxation, the reporting, the compliance side, and empower our clients really to be in the pilot seat and to make the directions of where they want their portfolio to go. So in its simplest terms and in simplest form, a self-managed super fund is just a tax structure. And that's all it is. Now, because of the tax benefits, it is one of the greatest structures to build your wealth in Australia. And the reason I say that, you know, we're talking to predominantly property people here. If you buy property and you hold it for the next 20 years, you could have hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars of capital gains and hundreds of thousands of dollars of potential capital gains tax to pay, right? In a self-managed super fund, you hold that asset to over the age of 65, and everyone can go into retirement phase in their self-managed super fund, or potentially from the age of 60, you can go into retirement phase. And then the capital gains tax, once you're in retirement phase, the capital gains tax is 0. And It's massive. And it could be worth hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And then from that point, once you've got your bulk cash, however it's invested, all of the income that's generated, again, becomes 0% tax. And that's why a self-managed super fund is such an amazing vehicle or structure to build your wealth.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I've had a SMSF fund for many, many years where I own property and shares in there. What I'd love to understand, there are quite strict rules and regulations around the use of self-managed super funds. And I think, firstly, I'll back up. You raise a really good point around the self-managed versus self-directed, because I've had my SMSF fund for many years and doesn't really take me any time at all. My accountant just sends me my financials once a year and I sign them off and it gets audited and that's about it. I have a quick look and then we just make a few decisions along the way. So having been in the trenches with one for a long time, they certainly aren't as complicated as I thought it was going to be. But there are a lot of strict rules and regulations, because I remember purchasing, I've got a few properties in there, but we had one property a while back where I bought a unit in there, renovated the unit, and it was just around the corner from my house, and it would have been perfect to be able to rent out to a family member. But you can't do that, can you? So there's so many rules and regulations around if you own property in self-managed super funds. If you mind just sharing a bit of insight around that for the listeners.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, I get this question about once a week where somebody wants to purchase a property and they basically want to purchase a holiday house, right? So a self-managed super fund, the rules of a self-managed super fund and the purpose of a self-managed super fund is for retirement purposes and income producing assets, right? So income producing assets for retirement. And or another really hard and fast rule is that you cannot get a personal benefit out of any of the assets that the self-managed super fund owns. So in other words, and the investment landscape, instead of being in an industry super fund, totally gets opened up, right? There's so many different investments that are available, such as property, cryptocurrency, you know, are probably two of the most popular at the moment alternative assets outside of just stocks and shares that most of the industry super funds are in. And so with a self-managed super fund, so you can buy a property, but you cannot get a personal benefit out of it. So you could buy a property in a holiday area, right? But you can't rent it out. Another one is that you could buy an antique car, okay? However, you can't drive it. You could buy artwork, but you can't put it on the wall in your house. It all has to be stored securely, and it's all going to be about being there for retirement purposes and income. So yeah, it's all. So you can invest in a lot with a self-managed super fund, but the purpose and the main guide is all about producing income for your retirement.
And what happens? There's pretty strict rules and penalties if you do happen to buy that house and happen to spend a weekend getting some personal benefit. What are the risks? What are the impact of being non-compliant?
Yeah, totally. And look, it's at the absolute extreme, you know, it's 5 years in imprisonment, and that's if you've been found to be completely negligent and criminal, okay, with your self-managed super fund, or, you know, up to 45% of your super is at risk, right, if you are deemed to be completely non-compliant. So it's not worth it. As I tell my clients, think of self-managed super fund. You know, you've got yourself and your partner as individuals, and think of it like a Chinese wall, and then you've got your self-managed super fund over here in a bubble, okay? And we can put money across the wall and we can make contributions, but we want to build up this bubble, and all of the assets we want to build up, make it as big as we can, so that when you do meet a condition of release, that you can live off of the income out of that bubble. But if you take money out, and it looks and feels like a normal bank account. We use Macquarie bank accounts. I think they've got nearly 90% of the entire SMSF market. That Macquarie bank account, you could physically transfer money into your own name. You could physically do it. But you do that, you burst the bubble, and now you are deemed as non-compliant, and then you're putting everything at risk.
I think that's a really good message that I wanted to drive home there, because you're right. I've got a bank account with all my other bank accounts, and it just sits there, and you can see this money sitting there, and it can be very tempting if month's tight to be able to pull from that, but you just can't do that. You've got to be really disciplined around how you use all those funds, but also manage it as well. So I think that's a really good message to share. Interestingly, self-managed super funds provides a huge amount of opportunity for property investors and developers, particularly when it comes to be able to access funds to be able to do development. Can you share with us how developers can leverage self-managed super funds to do property development?
Yeah, sure. So I'll answer this in two parts, right? If you're just using the funds of a self-managed super fund and you're not borrowing money from the bank or from the lenders, okay? As soon as you borrow money in a self-managed super fund, it's now classified as an LRBA, or a limited recourse borrowing arrangement. And that's where all the complexities come in. So if you've got funds, and let's say you've got, you know, $1.5 million, because you can have up to 6 members in a self-managed super fund. And I've actually got 6 brothers that are looking to combine all of them. This is a client that I spoke to yesterday. They're going to put a big pool of cash together. And then if they wanted to go out and do a development with using just the funds of their self-managed super fund, then there's no restrictions, there's no problem there. You can do that. The restrictions come into place when you want to borrow money, okay? So you can do this relatively easily as long as it's a one-part contract, okay? So this is why units and townhouses are quite popular in the mum and dad investor space, not necessarily the developer space, but, you know, we got mum and dad investors, and they want to go buy a townhouse in their self-managed super fund, and it's all going to settle on completion as a one-part contract, right? So I'm talking to developers, so most of your clients should understand what I'm saying. So you can't do a house and land package, right? You can't settle on the house first and borrow money on a non-income producing asset of land, and then do payments of the development along the way, right?
Yeah, so you're also talking about off the plan is another way. One-part contract is the same as off the plan.
Yes.
Or 10/90 contracts, 10% deposit, 90% on completion. That's another couple of ways of what you're talking about there.
Yes. So that's relatively easy, okay? 1, you've got the money. You don't need money from the bank, no problem. 2, one-part contract, no problem. The third way of doing it, and this is sort of where we discussed, Amanda, is that you can actually put together a property unit trust, okay? And you'd have 3 different parties or 3 different self-managed super funds, so that not one has a controlling interest, and then they would have units. So they'd have units in the unit trust, and then that unit trust could borrow from the banks in order to do a development.
And they wouldn't be, if the unit trust was borrowing from the banks, that's not limited recourse lending because it's independent of the self-managed super fund. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
So therefore, effectively, those self-managed super funds become money partners to a particular deal. So yeah, that's a really powerful message there, because for those of people out there who do perhaps have funds tied up in a self-managed super fund, or if you're doing deals and you need to be able to access some more funds, this is another way, another whole strategy of being able to tap into some more funds to be able to do deals. The important thing is it does give you a pool of funds to be able to do development in the first place, which I think is a great avenue. And I know a number of developers who do this, where they've done multiple deals together with some other parties, and they've grown their self-managed super fund pool so much quicker, because with the returns that you can get from property development in a short period of time, they're able to grow their pot of gold so much quicker with the basis of development profits. So it's certainly a great avenue there, and something that we're looking into as well. Can you give the listeners one tip to take away from our discussion they can use right away? So whether that's just assessing their own circumstances to whether an SMSF is suitable for them, or if they want to buy a property, any little tip that you could give our listeners would be amazing.
Yeah, sure. So look, I'll give you a couple. Right. The power of salary sacrificing is so overlooked in this country, and so few people really understand the power of diverting their income into a better tax structure, being a self-managed super fund. Right. And I'll put it into an example. If you're earning over 120, or let's say you're in the highest tax bracket, right, and you're paying 40 cents in the dollar tax plus a 2% Medicare. If you take $10,000 and you salary sacrifice that into your self-managed super fund, then you're no longer paying 40, if it's on 10 grand, you're no longer paying $4,700 in tax. Right. Another way to look at it is, in the highest tax bracket, you are working between Monday, 9 o'clock, to about 11 o'clock on Wednesday for the government. And then you get to keep the rest. Right. Nearly 50% is gone. Now, if you divert $10,000, you reduce your taxable income, you put it over to your self-managed super fund or your industry super fund. This works for both. Now the tax bracket drops from 47% down to 15%. And that now means that in your back pocket, or in your critical mass, instead of having $100, you've now got $8,500. Now, that is a 60% increase, and it's a 60% more money that if you took that into your back pocket and I said, Amanda, I want you to turn this to $8.5 grand for me. And if you're in the highest tax bracket, you would have to make 114% return on your money, pay tax on it, and then to come back to me and go, Jace, I've got my 8.5 grand. Now, for you to get a 114% return is going to take time, effort, energy, right? This happens instantly just by using a different tax bracket. And so few people are fully aware of this and the power of it, that once you get your head around it, it can be one of the greatest ways to build up your nest egg within a better tax structure, because that's all it is. That's all a self-managed super fund is. So that's probably one of the greatest tips that I've got, is to have a look at the power of salary sacrificing. And we're going to give everyone a link to a scorecard. It won't take them long. It's 19 questions, and it just allows your listeners to jump in and draw a line in the sand to see exactly where their knowledge is at the moment, and essentially they'll get a customized report of some of the next steps for them to start thinking about. So it'll only take a couple of minutes for them to answer the questions, but that'll be a great start. And then if anybody does want to have a chat to me and to learn more about, how they can salary sacrifice and how that all works, then on that, there's an opportunity to book into my calendar for a 15-minute complimentary chat. So that's probably one of the greatest tips that I've got. And yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Well, this has been really informative, and I hope that the listeners, if you're listening to this, you're actually understanding that self-managed super fund doesn't have to be complicated. Jason's got an incredible way of explaining things in a really simple way. And hopefully now you've opened your mind to whether an SMSF may be suitable for you. But definitely I'll include the link in the show notes where you can go through there and do the 19 questions. I've done it. It's really, really simple, and it gives you a good understanding about your own knowledge of self-managed super funds and how it can potentially be suitable for you. So if tapping into an SMSF for either whether it's buying property or doing development. Like when you're doing development, you want to build your A team and make sure you've got the right people around you to support you. And when you've got people like Jason in your pocket, that's going to really make this experience so much easier as well. So thank you so much, Jason, for sharing your journey and also simplifying SMSF for a way that we can get our heads around without our eyes glazing over and blocking our ears, so we don't have to jam our already full heads. So I'll put that details in the show notes, and if anyone wants to reach out to you, they certainly can. Thanks again for your time.
No dramas at all. Thanks for having me on. Cheers, Amanda.
Bye for now. Thank you so much for listening. This is Building Lifestyles, a show designed to help everyday Australians create a lifestyle that inspires them using property development strategies. This podcast was produced by the Rising Star Developer. We've been helping Australians realise their financial and lifestyle goals since 2020. We play a pivotal role in educating, supporting and celebrating the goals and successes of our students and our community. To find out how we can help you realise your property, wealth and lifestyle goals, head to our website www.risingstardeveloper.com.au. To make sure you don't miss an episode of Building Lifestyles, be sure to subscribe to and follow the show in your favourite podcast app. And while you're there, leave us a 5-star review as it really helps others find the show. I'm Amanda McEwen, and we'll be back next episode with more tips on how you can build your lifestyle.